The following is a presentation of the Mat Talk Podcast Network.
The mind of Pat Popolizio is a wondrous thing. And for you Pac Wrestling fans, you'll get to go inside the mind of the Skip each and every episode here on the Pac Mentality Pop-Ins podcast. Now, here's your host, NC State Director of Athletics Digital Communications, Brian Reinhardt.
Welcome to a brand new episode of the Pac Mentality Pop-Ins podcast. I'm your host, NC State Director of Digital Communications, Brian Reinhardt, and this is a very special episode of the podcast. We are devoting the entire episode to recruiting. And since he has recently done 2 straight podcasts, we're contractually obligated to give Pat Popolizio this episode off. But we went right down the hall, no pun intended, and got another member of the coaching staff. Associate head coach Adam Hall joins us first time on the podcast. Adam, this is your chance to boost our downloads. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
You seem pumped. I like it.
Yeah. I think it's the first time I've been on here.
It is. Believe me, you let me know that this is the first time you've been on here. So glad you could get you. We see your enthusiasm during duels. We hope you're going to bring the enthusiasm to this podcast here.
Absolutely.
And a little background on Adam first. He joined the Wolfpack Wrestling program in the summer of 2015 following 4 seasons on staff at Columbia. And that was after you wrapped up your international and All-American careers in undergrad at Boise State. And you had the second most wins in school history when you graduated. And not to get too far into the weeds, we're going to stick to recruiting here, but I did want to get your voice on this subject. It's a little bit controversial, but your perspective, it's one that's not heard too often. And of course, we're going to talk about Boise State. You graduated in 2011 and the school discontinued their program 6 years later. And as I said, it was a little bit controversial because Boise State was not only very strong in the Mountain West Conference, but also sending many nationally ranked wrestlers to the NCAAs. And that was back in 2017, but I'm sure it's something you still think about today. And my question to you, what were your thoughts when you first heard of the news? And as an alum of one of the best wrestlers in school history, how hard was it to process the program folding?
It was really hard. I actually found out from Coach Stutzman, John Stutzman up at Buffalo. He just texted me and said Boise ? And I remember I was walking to my church for a function, and I just had this like numb feeling as I was walking up because I saw his text and I knew exactly what he was talking about. I just had this really bad feeling over the previous year or two with everything that I was hearing and things that were going down with the administration. So yeah, it kind of feels like it's left a void. I was actually in Idaho this last week doing a camp, and a bunch of coaches asked me what's going to take to bring it back, and I was like creating a relationship with the new president and finding some people that want to support it monetarily, because I told them the key to getting the program back is probably going to be adding a women's program as well, which is a hot topic right now in wrestling. But yes, I told them it hurts me to come back to that part of the state, especially to drive past the school, because all the memories, all the time and energy devoted to the university, the program representing everything, and to have it dropped in such a way is pretty tough to live with.
I was going to say, and you talked about that kind of, but do you sort of have mixed feelings now seeing all these other schools announcing that they're adding wrestling to their athletic departments?
I do, because I'm excited for where wrestling is going. And they announced yesterday or in recent history that Bellarmine in Kentucky, Bellarmine is adding, or their wrestling or their entire athletic department is going Division I. So hopefully that's adding another program. But just as a whole, I love to see, seems like just about every couple months, the new programs announcing that they're adding wrestling, and it's awesome, but it seems to be that there are more NAIA or smaller division schools that are adding wrestling. And I still want to see Division I growing, or I want to see Division I grow. So yeah, I think that it'd be nice for that push. Wrestling's hot right now, like I said, because of women's wrestling, and I think it's a big part of where we're headed.
I know that's not always the easiest subject to talk about, but I appreciate the candid answers and insight from your perspective. So let's talk about something I know you enjoy, recruiting. I kind of thought this episode of the podcast, I kind of dubbed it College Wrestling Recruiting 101. I think it's a good idea to go over some of the simpler rules of recruiting, how it works in D1, to get your perspective on it. And I'm also going to sprinkle in some fan questions. So you're perfect for this topic, not only because of how important and how much time is spent on recruiting, but NC State's really enjoyed some strong recruiting classes over the last few seasons. The commits for next year are definitely trending in that direction of another highly ranked recruiting class. But first off, let's start with some basics for college recruiting. Rosters often have 30 student athletes for one season, but the scholarship limit in college wrestling is 9.9 per school. Explain what we mean by 9.9 scholarships and how are they divided up here at NC State?
So wrestling is an equivalency sport as in comparison to a head count sport. So football, say they have whatever it is, 85 or 105 scholarships. That's all or nothing, full or nothing. Same with women's gymnastics, a few other sports. And those are head count. Equivalency is you're able to split the money up how you want. So, it is hard. It's hard at any school that has 9.9 or, there's some schools that have even less than that. And it's just hard being able to spread the money around. And I think it's important that we have decent financial aid so that we're able to kind of have two avenues to go down. But yes, it is hard with 9.9 and having 30 plus athletes on the team.
So I was going to say, here at NC State, we obviously have guys on scholarship, and they're at various levels of scholarship money. But you also have recruited walk-ons and guys that get scholarship money through their academic achievement and, as you said, financial aid. But because I love money, I have to ask, how early in the recruiting process are you talking about money with a potential recruit versus selling him on the school, the program in Raleigh first?
We don't talk about money early on, or we try not to, because we're trying to get to know the prospective student athlete and vice versa. So I think, getting to know somebody, it takes a while. It takes conversations. It takes meeting them in person. It takes seeing them at competitions. It's just a lot of work that goes into it before those business conversations are had. Yeah.
How's it determine year to year how big an entire recruiting class is going to be?
Need, roster cap, the number of guys we want to have really for the year. Those are the two main determinants. Yeah.
And I have a feeling we're going to jump around various topics within recruiting here, just with stuff that pops in my head. I think one thing I want you to explain: official visit versus unofficial visit. What are the differences?
Official visit, we can pay for everything: travel, hotels for the parents. We can pay for travel for the student athlete, food, entertainment money, entrance to sporting events. Like I said, we can pay for the parents' hotel when they're on campus, but mainly that's the big visit. Unofficial visits are you pay your own way, hotel, travel, everything, and there's limitations with it as well. Like having contact with the prospective student athlete has to be within a mile of campus. So if you want to go to lunch and they pay for themselves, it has to be within a mile. And but otherwise, like campus tours, everything, they're pretty similar. And yeah.
How many official visits can a prospect take, and when can they start that process when they're in high school?
So a student athlete is allowed 5 official visits, and they start after August 1st of their rising junior year. So this coming fall, we have some dates set out, and we're already planning for after that August 1 date.
Kind of had to laugh to myself while you're answering these, because I didn't really inform you that this is basically a quiz of the NCAA rulebook.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm part of the NCAA administration staff, so you're doing good so far. You're passing the test.
Yeah, they recently, it seems like every year they change it, and so we have to stay up to date. In fact, in my office, I have just posted up on above my desk just all the prospective dates for, there's like football, hockey, just everything, and at the end it's all other sports. So
I feel bad. I don't want to get you in trouble here, so I'm trying to ask basic questions. But I feel like I could.
It's my job.
We'll see. We can maybe hit edit here, but so let's say you get that recruit on campus, you get him to Raleigh. This is actually a fan question from Brian Penny. He wants to know, what's a typical visit like for a recruit? Does it vary with their interest in different academic programs or what they want to pursue outside of wrestling? What do you guys like to do with recruits here in Raleigh?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it all depends on, are there multiple recruits in, or is there just one or two people in on the weekend? I'd say if we have more than 3 people in on the weekend, it's a little harder to personalize it, like getting somebody in front of, say that the prospective student athlete is interested in business. It's going to be harder to pull them away from the group, just because, I mean, we're limited in the number of people that we can pull around and utilize. So getting them in front of specific people is harder, but definitely taking them to the specific spots on campus where they're going to be going to school, kind of where they're going to be, their studies are going to be focused. We try to make it as in-depth as possible. And plus it's 48 hours, that they're on campus. So it's pretty limited in that. And I think part of that too is we like to show them campus, but at the same time, the majority of the time we want them spending with, time spent with our guys, because they're going to be spending most of the time with them anyway. And they want to see how they mesh. So, kind of answering the rest of that question. Yeah, it varies depending on the weather, depending on whether we're going to a football game, or if it's a non-football weekend, it's volleyball, soccer, like something in the fall. In the spring, it just all depends, because it's a different time than the fall. Guys are usually wrestling during that time as opposed to the fall. A lot of guys are maybe playing football or soccer or something like that, and the focus on wrestling isn't. It's a little bit different too. So,
for you personally, what part of NC State University or Raleigh do you like to show off to guys when they're in town?
Downtown. We're 5 minutes from downtown, and we really talk about how this is an awesome place to live, and our guys like to take the PSAs, the prospective student athletes, to what they do. They go bowling, they go swimming, they go fishing. They like to take them, where they go on their off time. And so for us, we do the typical tours and everything, but I think the big part is when we schedule with our guys, like, where are you going to go? Like, what are you thinking? We go, we talked with our guys about, we like to plan it out to a certain extent, so we know, everything that's going on.
Okay, so that's when you guys get a recruit on campus, but a lot of your job is recruiting away from NC State. And I think 2 areas we can talk about: in-home recruiting visits and scouting. And for a coaching staff, how much time is devoted to being on the road recruiting during a year, and what members of the staff can represent the school recruiting on the road?
So on staff coaches, 3 designated coaches that have responsibilities and abilities to go off campus. Pat, our head coach, myself, and Donnie Vincent. So Obi Blanc is not allowed to go off campus as a recruiter.
And am I correct? Right now, the NCAA wrestling, there's no dead period like other sports. Is that correct?
They just instituted 2 dead periods.
Okay, well, I didn't update my NCAA book yet. So
one is during NCAAs, and one is sometime, I think the end of the summer. I'll have to check on the actual date, but I know they instituted one for the NCAA championships, which I don't necessarily agree with, because, like I was talking with some other coaches, the nobody's recruiting during that time anyway. So I'd like to see a recruiting calendar happen, because our sport, we're very hard working, but we're stubborn. We're allowed to recruit, we're going to recruit. And I don't think it's the best for the longevity of a college coach's career or their well-being.
This is pretty self-explanatory, but let's touch on in-home visits. Explain what that means, and are there limits like an official visit on campus?
In-home visits, you just schedule it with the prospective student athlete, and you just have to stay within your limitations of contacts and evaluations. You're allowed a certain number of contacts, which is like your in-person contact with them, versus evaluations. You can go to a club or a tournament and just evaluate the recruit from afar. So you just have to stay within those limitations. But really, I think anything more than 1 or 2 times, like actually an intimate setting, like where you're meeting with a recruit, more than that, it's kind of just, I don't know. I don't want to say not necessary, but there are other ways to have contact with the student athlete. So.
And another fan question. This one is from NCSU WFBS, and I'm thinking that might be an alias and not his real name, but any interesting behind the scenes stories of life on the road recruiting? You and Pat, travel buddies, who's the coordinator?
We sit down as a staff and just kind of map out where we want to go and who we want to go see and what time. And really it's kind of a piecing the puzzle together, because at the end of the day, we still have to be here taking care of our own team. You know, that's the hard part, is with the balance there. And, you know, we kind of try to space out as much as we can where these PSAs are seeing multiple faces. And I think stories, I think one that caught Pat and I off guard when we were on the road, we were actually seeing Jarrett Trombley, who's now on our team. And, you know, we thought the home visit went pretty well. And then towards the end of it, they kind of just chatted for a minute, and he's like, well, I want to just commit. And we're like kind of taken aback by it, where we're like, man, that's awesome. You know, he's like, I came to campus, saw what I needed to see. And yeah. So I think just that was one of the more bigger surprises that you're just like, it's awesome. Let's run with it. You know, so. Is
it hard for coaches, either official visits, in-home? You have a good feeling about the kid, but they're not going to commit right away most of the time. But you're leaving it kind of with a question. How is that for a coach? Do you go home and think about, man, I could have said this different, or we could have taken him here different, or when's he going to let us know? Is that a hard part of coaching and recruiting?
Absolutely. I think a lot of coaches take it personal, and I think I've learned from watching my college coach, and also just thinking about putting myself in their shoes, in the PSA's shoes. I always have to remember, at the end of the day, it's their decision. It's not mine. I can do everything in the world, and they still may end up going someplace else, you know, and that's fine if they find someplace that fits them better. And, you know, it's the same thing. I tell guys, if you feel like this is the place for you, let us know. Because, you know, I think the hard part is the waiting, and just, yeah, you know, I don't know when I want to make a decision, or I think down the road. And it's like, I mean, to me, that's like, you still want to go take some visits, that's fine. But I think just express that to a coach, because I'd rather have a kid tell me up front, I'm not interested, or I'm actually going to go someplace else. That's fine, because I actually encourage that, because I'm, you know, just not wasting each other's time.
And another part of life on the road, it's in-person scouting. And I think this is one area that's changed an awful lot over the last few years, with so many tournaments now being streamed. But going back to some old school recruiting thoughts, how important is it for you to be at a tournament wearing that NC State shirt, sit in front row, watching prospective recruits in action versus watching them on tape?
It's really important, because anybody can sit at home and just say, hey, nice match, bud. But for them to actually see you at their match, and sit there like you're there watching. I think it means a lot to them. I think there's only so much that texting, calling can do. You have to be there. And that's the hard part is the balance. If you're gone, you're away from your guys, you're away from your family, away from the comforts. And so, but that's what I signed up for. So.
Question we got from Twitter from Ryan Smith. Do you guys try to recruit a specific style of wrestler, or is that style they wrestled at NC State learned more in the PAC's practice room?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think by the time somebody, we get to the point where we're recruiting somebody and they're very interested, they understand what we're about, what our expectations are. And I think that, we joke, like, people ask me on the road, you guys recruit guys that look like they're basketball players or cross-country runners.
Very tall.
Yeah, and I'm like, Pat really likes those guys, and it kind of fits our style. And but at the end of the day, I think guys who are very aggressive and are guys who are looking to score points, are very offensive. I think that's a big part of it. And then the other side is they get here and they really understand what we're about. We're a little more blue collar in the sense that we have a pretty gritty program, and I think it guys either buy in or they don't. When they get here, and the guys that do take off and really see progress.
Now, coming from a PR side of things, I cannot promote or even name a recruit until they sign all the proper paperwork during the signing periods, and that happens in the fall and spring of their senior years of high school. But you guys obviously get commitments from guys much earlier than that. So first, how early are guys trending to now commit, and how much do you still have to recruit a commitment before they've signed?
It's a great question, because
that was from me. So that was a great question.
Yeah, it was a great question. So they just moved back the contact period for rising juniors. It used to be September 1 of their junior year, and now it's June 15th. It actually just started. And so it's hard because they just moved that back, and you're thinking, wow, there's 2 years before this PSA is going to be potentially on campus. And so it's got to be like the tortoise versus the hare. You got to take the tortoise approach, and because we don't believe in rush recruiting. It's never worked for us. Anytime it's happened, it maybe wasn't the right fit, whatever. And I think a big part of it is knowing that and being patient, because I'm not necessarily a patient person, so I have to be reminded and remind myself that, because I get excited about recruiting and about guys who are interested, and so that's that's part of the game. But I know that it's a long time before, and we tell our guys, it doesn't matter whether like early in your junior year or late in your senior year. Like Trent Hidley didn't commit until November of his senior year, and we wanted him to take his visits and see other places to know that this was the place for him. And I think it's the same way. Like, yeah, we're going to have juniors visit, but I think that they need to figure it out for themselves and do their homework. And if this is the place they want to be, we want them to know it. Don't want them to second guess anything. So.
You kind of brought up a good point. If you're recruiting these juniors, they're 15, 16, 17 years old. They're going to leave NC State 21, 22, 23. How difficult is it to forecast collegiate weights of these prospective recruits?
That's the other point of it, too, is you're 2 years out, and this is like a big formative time of their life, especially physically. So you try to project, but that's part of the puzzle. That's the double-edged sword of being able to recruit athletes a little bit earlier. And that's just part of the game. And I think trying to figure it out and wait until later is better, so that you don't get burned and they don't get burned. So,
and all these websites that cover college wrestling right now, they do rankings. How hard in the recruiting process is it for coaches to ignore high school rankings? Because that's all fans want to focus on.
It's really hard, because it's also, I will say this, the rankings are based on a lot of, are result-based, completely result-based. So for us to look and see like, wow, this kid's a top 50 kid. There's a reason he's probably in like Flo's top 50. He's done a lot of big things. And at the end of the day, we tell our guys when they get here, you can just take any rankings, anything from high school and just throw it out the window because everybody's at a clean slate. Because we see it all the time where guys come in, with a chip on their shoulder because they didn't finish high school the way they wanted to, and they end up progressing better or faster than guys who came in with some accomplishments. And I think it just all depends. But I think that when they get here to us, it doesn't matter because it's a clean slate.
This is another good question from Ryan Smith, and I'll add a little bit to it. But on this podcast, we talk a lot about the Wolfpack Regional Training Center and our current and former guys competing internationally at tournaments. And NC State's had 4 different wrestlers make a world team in the last 3 summers. But my question, when regards to recruiting right now, is there any international recruiting? And down the road, do you see colleges trying to get internationals to come to the U.S. to compete in folk style?
Boy, that's tough. I mean, some schools have been able to do it. American, Campbell, Oklahoma State. There have been a few schools that, Citadel have had some guys come over, and it's hard recruiting, because they're so far away. 2, they have different entrance exams, and 3, just the acclimation. Collegiate wrestling's hard. It's about control, and so that's one thing that international wrestlers probably struggle with or would struggle with. And it's just like anything. Our wrestling is a very high skill set sport. So I think it would take quite a bit of time for them to acclimate to the sport. So in the future, the hard part too is these countries, their athletes are paid pretty well, usually wrestling for the country. And so it's like, why would I go to the U.S. when I can wrestle for Belarus or Russia or wherever and be paid to do it and go to a world championship or, whatever. And I think that draw is hard, and it'd have to come from, I think, a foreign PSA's interest in your school as opposed to you going out and searching for a needle in a haystack,
Adam, we've covered a lot of topics within the recruitment world. We've barely scratched the surface, so I think we can wait and see how many downloads this episode gets and maybe have you on for recruiting round 2. But I appreciate your time in talking about recruiting and how crucial it is to building the program here at NC State.
Appreciate you having me on, Brian.
I want to thank everybody for listening today. This is your Pack Mentality Pop-Ins podcast covering all things NC State wrestling. Until next time, Wolfpack wrestling fans, go Pack.
Mentality Pop-Ins podcast is produced by the Mat Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, go to MatTalkOnline.com.